I love dinosaurs. I love learning about dinosaurs. It keeps my science brain fresh and active. I love that scientists are learning new things all the time about dinosaurs. And this reminds me of the thrill of discovery, the potential for the expansion of human knowledge, and that we have not yet reached the limits of what is possible to know. I love that I have something to talk about with young children and with people of all ages who have dinosaurs as a special interest. To be clear, I also love birds. I love that birds are dinosaurs, but mainly this story is about non-avian dinosaurs from the Mesozoic. One of my favorite things about dinosaurs is the reminder of the fullness of time. When you look at a timeline, the age of the dinosaurs from the Triassic to the Jurassic to the Cretaceous, that itself lasted a long time, from 252 million years ago to around 66 million years ago. So Hadrosaurus folki, the state dinosaur of New Jersey. Did you know you had a state dinosaur? I'll tell you all about the Hadrosaurs another time. The Hadrosaurus folki, from about 80 million years ago, from the Cretaceous, is closer to us in the timeline than Hadrosaurus folki is on the timeline to a dinosaur like Coelophysis from the Triassic 225 million years ago. I never cease to be amazed and fascinated. Thinking about time on a geologic scale brings some concreteness to the idea that the arc of the universe is long. The web of life is complex and it extends backward and forward in time as well as all around the earth. Change sometimes happens slowly if we look at it on a human scale, but it does happen. Organisms evolve. One of the things we know about life is that it keeps moving. My attachment to dinosaurs is a kind of a story. The story of life on Earth has its highs and lows. It has its drama, it has its twists and turns. But the meaning is constructed, right? The things that strike me as interesting or exciting or profound are that way because of how I and other people think and talk about the facts. The relationships and changes of life on Earth over time capture my imagination, but the facts themselves remain simply what they are. Humans can't help but make meaning and find patterns and seek connections. These are adaptive skills. We will never stop making stories. Yet we also have the power to reframe and revise the stories that are meaningful to us. Whether these are historical stories or folk stories or scientific stories or personal stories, we can go and re-examine the elements of a story and make new meaning. We can change our relationship to a story and we can connect with people around us in a new way as we explore our stories together. Stories do a lot for us as humans. They can convey kinship, helping us to get to know our elders and our ancestors and chosen family. Stories carry culture, becoming touch points and common metaphors that help people understand one another and explain cultural mores. I don't know if you read my column this month. Anybody get the Darmok and Jalad Tanagra reference in my column? Yes? All right. Amen for the Star Trek people. We need metaphors to be able to understand each other. Stories give us frameworks for meaning, helping us to understand that trouble does not last always, that dragons can be fought and sometimes befriended, that there is still good in the world, even when Mordor is ascendant, and that sometimes the real treasure is the friends we make along the way. Folk stories and sacred stories and foundational cultural stories give us symbols to work with in our conversations with each other and a departure point for yet more stories in literature, in art, and in drama. Our personal stories and these big stories can get woven together. The way we understand ourselves and our capacity to face challenges can be affected by our understanding of what a hero is, or what success means, or who gets to have agency in the world. Stories are powerful, and we can leverage that power for good or for ill. At the very least, we need to be aware of the power of stories so that we can figure out when they're being used for harm or when we have unintentionally thought ourselves into a corner. My colleague, the Reverend Michael Slack, who leads the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, led worship for the DC area ministers earlier this week, and he said that stories are sticky. They stick to us. Stories can connect us, or they can get us stuck. He said that when we understand a situation as a story, we can ask, whose story is this? What is the impact of this story? Is this a story based in facts or fear or something else? And then we can decide to find a different point of view for the story or to switch up the plot or change the background music. Though I have said it before, it bears mentioning again that Timothy Snyder in his book On Tyranny urges us to look beyond a monolithic story and to enrich our ability to talk about alternative futures. He says that certain kinds of tyrants practice the politics of eternity, an ahistorical view that is concerned with the past, he says, but in a self-absorbed way, free of any real concern with facts. Its mood is a longing for past moments that never really happened during epochs that were, in fact, disastrous. In The Politics of Eternity, Snyder continues, the seduction by a mythicized past prevents us from thinking about possible futures. Since crisis is permanent, the sense of emergency is always present. Planning for the future seems impossible or even disloyal. How can we even think of reform when the enemy is always at the gate? Snyder suggests that we must go back to a critical study of history. He says history allows us to see patterns and make judgments. It sketches for us the structures within which we can seek freedom. It reveals moments, each of them different, none entirely unique. To understand one moment is to see the possibility of being the co-creator of another. History permits us to be responsible, not for everything, but for something. Snyder knows that stories are powerful. In these times when the power of stories is being used for national and international scales for great harm, as well as for great resistance to tyranny, it is even more important for us to gather in communities where we practice stories of connection and liberation. This is, I believe, one of the core purposes of a congregation, right? We got to get together and practice stories of connection and liberation. Sometimes when we get stuck in a story in a bad way, we need to go back and look at the elements of that story, find out what's factual, and seek out other perspectives. Some stories are powerful because they are cultural or sacred or mythic or personal, and some stories are powerful because they involve real people who took real actions that align with values such as courage, love, and liberation. And this is one of the reasons I sneak Unitarian Universalist history into wisdom stories and sermons, because we need to know our history. We need examples and maps. We need to know what didn't work sometimes and why. And at the same time, sometimes stories lose something in the retelling. So it's a good idea to go back and re-examine the ways we tell our stories. For instance, the way we talk about John Murray has changed a bit over the years. For one thing, Thomas Potter sometimes gets less attention, even though I think he's the hero of this chapter of the story. John Murray is certainly important to Universalist history. Once he settled in Massachusetts with the help of his father-in-law, Winthrop Sargent, and John's second wife, Judith Sargent Murray, John changed the course of religious freedom in the early United States. He put a lot of energy into organizing the Universalist movement. And I will tell you those stories another time. But back in Barnegat Bay in 1770, it was Thomas Potter whose hospitality, patience, generosity, and persistence made that story possible. When I was in seminary, we taught kids a song to the tune of My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. It's a fine song, Generations of children learned who John Murray is with that song. And it mentions Thomas Potter, but doesn't say much about him. So the song we sang today preached the gospel of love with much more of a dialogue. Someone, in this case Lisa Romantum Schwartz, went back and looked at the story again. She went back and looked at the facts and found a new perspective that was rooted in what happened. In these times, I think it is good to remember someone like Thomas Potter, who prepared their mind, their heart, and their friends for a moment of opportunity. Few of us will have a chance to make grand and public gestures that will save the world, but many of us can prepare ourselves and our communities for surprise chances when kindness or truth can move things in the right direction, or at least when a little sand in the gears can slow the progress of harm. The songs and the rituals that help us to remember our stories don't have to be critical pieces of scholarship in themselves. We can point to reliable sources while making meaning and finding symbolism and inspiration in the narrative. Stories and the values they illustrate come alive for us in rituals. The water ceremony in September invokes not only our shared spiritual life, fed by many different sources, but is also a reminder of our history with gender equality. The flower ceremony in the late spring is not only a ritual celebrating the beauty of diversity, but also a reminder of a time when our Unitarian siblings resisted fascism in Europe. Stories are told and held and remembered in embodied ways, as well as narrative ways. Rituals don't have to be limited to religious communities. When my mother died in 2008, her nursing colleagues wanted to have a special service for her at the hospital where she spent most of her career. My dad and I were welcome guests, but it was really a ceremony for the nurses and the other clinicians, for honoring her lifetime of dedication and for rededicating themselves to the values of their profession. The nurses' memorial was a few weeks later than the funeral at my mother's congregation. Sometimes people in caring professions are so busy managing logistics and feelings for other people, it takes extra time to be able to process their own feelings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is.
So at the nurses' memorial, there was a special reading and a ritual presentation of white roses. There were remarks by people who knew her well. And one of my mother's friends had a daughter who was a professional vocalist, and she sang For Good from the musical Wicked. You're probably familiar with the song For Good. Eamon played it for the offertory. It wasn't in the movie that just came out. It'll be in the second movie. I understand Patty and her daughter sang it for Reverend Karen's farewell service.
Yeah.
And the lyrics include the phrase, "Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good." And the vocalist added my mother's name at the end of the song. When the original, they repeat the line, "Because I knew you." She said, "Because of Maggie." Even though I didn't feel the need to clear the air with my mother as the characters do in the song, I associated For Good with my mother for a long time. The memorial service was a ritual that contained stories, and the story of the song contained a reminder of the ways we grow and change, that those ways are part of how we carry our loved ones with us. The potential for change is a great reason to explore our stories. Mental health professionals sometimes talk about narrative therapy or story editing. The idea that we can reframe the ways we talk about our lives, retelling our own stories in new ways that are also true, can help us to unlock new solutions, to improve our sense of agency in our own lives, right? We are a people making stories, not necessarily always a people that something just happens to. And we can reinforce the joy that we can create in the here and now. Retelling the story might be aided by further research, uncovering more of the context of our histories than we knew at the time, or by receiving the stories of others and noticing common themes as well as differences. As always, connection matters. Our work during the interim period involves some storytelling on the congregational level. Last year, when we met for the history pizza party, we talked about the story of this congregation as a place of dedication and participation. We talked about how learning is important to you. And we also talked about some things that you have learned over the years about helping each other to process your conflicts productively and directly. This year, as you consider revising your mission statement, we have talked about the story of this congregation as a place of sanctuary, a community that saves lives by making room for people who need space for meaning and purpose, and whose journeys are not necessarily accepted in other places. Your future will involve bringing forward the parts of those stories that you want to keep and editing the parts that make it difficult to adapt to the changing religious landscape. Reflecting on our personal and congregational and cultural stories is big work. It can be emotional. Telling and retelling our stories, listening to each other's stories, is faith formation. We have been talking about this a little bit in our Authentic Selves study group. Reflecting on our stories is sometimes one of the activities of rites of passage. In the past, this congregation has had a program called Affirmation for students in 8th or 9th grade. In most other UU congregations, this comparable program is called Coming of Age. I remember one coming of age group I helped facilitate. The youth had a rich opportunity for reflection as part of our retreat. This was maybe 6 months after the memorial service I talked about earlier. My co-facilitator's family had a cabin in Southern Virginia, a place with a yard that backed onto a lovely creek, plenty of outdoor space for silent journaling and reflecting. So we gave the youth a chance to think about their stories. We encouraged the youth to create playlists about their spiritual journeys to share on the car ride down. And we had reserved time at a high ropes course and almost had to cancel because of predicted thunderstorms. But the youth created a weather magic ritual in front of the fireplace, and perhaps it was coincidental that the storms held off, but it made for a great story. It was a good retreat, but very emotional for everyone. And so by the time we piled into the cars for the long ride home, we were tired. The other chaperone in the front seat of my car fell asleep immediately. The two youth in the back seat were in their own world, as it should be, and I let them choose the music. And they chose the soundtrack to Wicked. So there I was, driving down a 2-lane highway in Virginia, hoping the GPS on my Prius didn't lose satellite signal. And eventually the youth stopped singing along and got deeply involved in their own conversation, and I was processing my own thoughts and feelings and exhaustion while the music kept going. And then For Good came on the stereo. The song from the memorial service. I was totally safely driving. I was holding it together. My eyes were just getting a little bit teary. And Kristen Chenoweth and Adina Menzel were singing, like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun. And I came around a bend in the road. And there was a giant plaster statue of a dinosaur.
Wow.
One of my symbols for the fullness of time and the presence of joy and the potential for evolution and change. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I had no idea that there was such a place called Dinosaur Land in Winchester, Virginia. I had no idea that I would meet a Tyrannosaurus Rex on my way home from a spiritual retreat. I swear on John Murray's boat that this really happened. In that moment, I felt the impact of all of the love in my life that had allowed me to grow and change. I have been changed for good. Humans are capable of creating new stories. We are capable of change in ourselves and our society. And the people we love are always present with us because of the lessons we carry with us as we change. Stories help us to create meaning, to find purpose, and to connect with each other. Let's choose a story about welcoming the stranger, sharing liberation, and putting love at the center. Let's choose to be changed for good. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.
Wow.